your latest column, your latest notes, you outlined that Bowden Francis has now got a grip on the fifth spot of the rotation. I think a lot of us are kind of getting that sense, especially with where Manoah is at physically. But let me start with this. Are we sure it's not the number 4 spot to start the season, given where Kevin Gossman's at?
It was looking that way maybe a week or two ago. Right now, I'm a bit more confident that Gausman can be ready for that. Even if he is, let's say, the fifth in line, how they line these guys up, those opening series. You can buy Gausman a few more days if you need to.
Yeah.
Normally, he likes to be 75 pitches and 75, his last 2 starts of spring training. I don't think that's going to happen, obviously, but if he gets up close to that once, then he can have his first MLB start of the season be 80, 85 pitches. That's no problem. Your bullpen is as fresh as it's going to be. I think he'll be ready at this point. It is still on a bit of a line. You never want to be playing catch-up. But thankfully, the Blue Jays' depth is in a bit better a place. The last 2 years, I have not liked it at all. And I think the Blue Jays were very fortunate. They did not need to reach too deep into it. They're in a much better place right now. And that starts with Francis. I like Bowden Francis a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of people here do, too. He's looked really good.
So I do want to get to Bowden in a second, but if it was the case where they decided to play it really cautious with Gausman, right? They went, you know what? We don't want to screw around. This is our staff ace. We've already got the injury to Manoah. Who is now the fifth guy, or sorry, who's now the sixth guy? Because I don't even have Manoah in that conversation until he can actually throw baseballs consistently.
I think it would go in the direction of a Mitch White, and it might look a bit like what they did last year when Manoah first went down. You remember their immediate plan B was Bowden Francis and Trevor Richards, kind of piggybacking one another. It wasn't ideal, but you were able to get through a couple. And if Gausman just needs 1 or 2 starts to build up, that's totally fine to do a couple of times. Now, if you needed a starter more long-term, that's when you start thinking about how quickly you can build up Yariel Rodriguez, Ricky Tiedemann, all the talents on the planet. Maybe a bit early for him. I think he still starts in AAA unless something goes completely disastrous down here. But next in line, I'd say a bit of a Mitch White, Trevor Richards taped together with a paint job on it.
Okay, that's good. That's great. I was hoping that you were going to say that something else emerged down there where you were like, you know what, they might take a look at this and it's kind of interesting. Sell me on hope rather than just the reality of that bleakness.
That's tough this spring. Yeah. I'm not selling many of those.
Okay, I was going to say, man, this is one of the things I'm going to get into because Bowden Francis seems to me, you tell me if I'm wrong because I'm not there, but I consume all the content. I'm reading your stuff. I'm following Ben. I'm sending out the odd text to people. And Francis seems like he's getting a lot of buzz, that the pitch mix looks good, that the velo is up. Your piece did a good job of outlining that, hey, he's trying to build up that arm right now, but it shouldn't be an issue, that the Jays might have a find here. But the rest of spring, it's like, what's the secondary storyline in terms of real positivity that's blooming to you? Because I see like Ernie Clement is making a case for himself. I'm like, that's great, but this can't be the Ernie Clement year. And I know it's spring or whatever, but yeah, what's been the storyline outside of Bowden Francis? Like, what are we looking at where you're going, oh, yeah, you know what? A lot of people down here, I'm having a lot of conversations about X.
I tell you what, JD, I'm on day, 35 of camp? I'm asking myself that question.
You know the
morning.
day of camp you're actually at? Are you scrawling it on the wall like a prisoner?
Dark.
Like, are you?
It's dark. There's a such thing as too much Florida, and you start to. And as our friends come in and out, I'll have Shai here with me for a couple of weeks. Then Ben, I believe I have Sportsnet's Dave Singh coming down next on the TV side of the same. So I'm turning into the crazy guy that's stuck here and hoping people bring me, trinkets from the outside world. But when you look around camp, there's really not that thing that's knocking you over, frankly. Ernie Clement is a good one. I think he's put himself in a spot to make this roster. But we're talking about the 26th spot on the roster. That's not going to excite anybody. This team needs to impact its ceiling, not the floor. The floor is fine. You need a higher ceiling if you're this team. Joey Votto's a fantastic story. I'm fascinated by how this is all happening. But again, we're talking about the floor, not the ceiling. So if you are looking at that ceiling, and I've said the same, I think, the last few springs, but right now, Bo Bichette looks as good as I have ever seen him. He is in ridiculous shape, better than I have ever seen, and it's not close. I think he is a player who has another level to his game there. But you're talking about something that we already have seen. He is going to be the guy that is driving this. And looking around the rest of camp, you're looking for those internal improvements. You're looking for Vladdy. You're looking for Kirk. but it kind of captures where this team is at, that you need to see it happen. Regular season, and it's kind of at the point where the spring training hype has almost lost the edge, frankly, because you want it to happen in the season.
Yeah, it's true. I think that a lot of the hype around the team is just it's gone now. Like there's not. Yeah. It's very much just call us when you're doing it. Don't tell us.
It needs to be earned back.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I've said this a few times that even if this team wins 100 games this year, we are sitting here on October 2nd saying prove it.
Yeah, actually, damn, that's true. I think that they've got a lot to lose with, like, say, a slow start or having a mediocre season or a season that feels like last year where the pitching is good, but the offense is very mediocre, and it just like it feels like there's a je ne sais quoi with the team that isn't happening. They're not resonating. It does feel as though they need Vladdy and Bo both to be studs, like exciting players that you really want to go see down at the ballpark. But you're right, in terms of, hey, was this season a success or not? They're kind of entering Maple Leafs territory of, you got to get it done in the playoffs, and we're not really going to go too crazy over anything that you do in the regular season. But, yeah, that's why you sign more impactful free agents sometimes than Justin Turner to try and buy some of those narratives early on. But, hey, it is what it is. But, okay, let's dig in on Bowden Francis a little bit, though, because if we're talking about ceiling, that's awesome with Bo Bichette. But, yeah, he's always been that guy to me where I'm like, yeah, this guy's going to drive the team now. He is the face of the franchise now. He is that guy. That's great to hear. That does excite me, knowing that he is in that incredible shape. And I've always looked at him that way anyway, though, is that he's never going to leave a stone unturned when it comes into trying to get better. But with Bowden Francis, I view him as a ceiling guy in this sense of, one, you need pitching depth, but two, like going into spring training, I wasn't sure it was going to be a guarantee that Manoah ended up with that fifth starter spot, that it was going to have to be earned. And the fact that you might actually have somebody here who's not just a fifth starter in the sense of, oh, you're throwing him out there, but who actually, he seems to be someone who could be good. Not ace, this isn't a top tier prospect, right? But someone who actually could conceivably end up looking like a +5 starter. Is that the way it feels to you?
It does. This is not a depth guy who's trying to slop his way through 5 innings.
Right.
There's some more upside with his actual stuff and with his build. I mean, Francis was great as a reliever last year, but he is a starter. I'm a big guy. He's bigger than me. And if that's where you are built to be a starter. He is 6'5", strong, well-built guy. And I think that'll let him hold his stuff over a start, which is the real key for him. Still throwing 94, 95 in the 5th inning, not just the first. That'll come. But Bowden is not just talented, but I think one of the most interesting players in this camp, in this league, when it comes to his mental game. When I talk to him after starts, he is taking a breath. He's taking his thoughts. He's talking about manifesting what's happening on the field. He's talking about his breath work. He's talking about envisioning what's going on out there. He is extremely thoughtful and mindful about how he goes through all of this. And he's also talked about how it used to work when he wasn't that. It blew up on him in the minor leagues. And this is why some guys develop a bit later. You don't need to be a superstar at 22. You don't need to be Ricky Tiedemann getting written about every day as a number one. It happens a little later for some guys. In Toronto, we've seen that more with hitters, but it can happen with pitchers too. And I really think that Bowden is a lock in a rotation on a lot of teams in this league. He's looked really impressive, and what impresses me most is that other starters are praising him. They don't do that just kind of willy-nilly, and it's not empty. When you're getting praise from other guys in that rotation, it really means something, and he's gotten a ton of that.
So there is a fallout to this, though, right? Which is, okay, if he's an above-average fifth starter and he's pitching well, what does Manoah have to do to jump him? Because at this point, it's clear he's going to start the season in Buffalo and that he's going to have to earn the Jays' trust, but can he steal that job from Bowden Francis? What's your read on how the next steps go for Alek?
With all of my optimism here at once, by that point, something else will have gone wrong. But
no, you can't play that. Itself. You can't play that card because that's obvious.
Does.
No, but yes, it does.
If he's
yes,
coming
it
back,
does.
He'll have to win the job. Yeah, he'll have to actually earn it. That's the point. This is asked. He will not be walking back into something, and this does feel like a situation where it enters the year, turns into a rehab stint eventually, which is just kind of a rebranded start in the minor leagues. That can work well for both sides, I think, frankly. But it's not going to be something, I don't think, that he is just walking back into. You can't just have a 6 ERA over a few starts and come back and take the job. After last season, that doesn't happen anymore. And this team, especially, if all 5 guys are rolling, you let it go. And I think Alek will need to earn that back when the time comes. He has done some work to move in that direction, both with his body and his relationship with the team and how this is all going. But I think it still has to be something he grabs and takes.
Yeah. So this is what I find most fascinating right now. It's like the Manoah story was always going to be the biggest one of spring, right? Because normally jobs aren't earned there. We can tend to get a little carried away with some of these stories. Most years, I actually think this season has been very reasonable because of the lack of hype element that we discussed earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Which is we're not blowing stuff out of proportion. There aren't too many things where people aren't going to lose their minds over Vogelbach versus 40-year-old Joey Votto, right? It ain't going to happen. And Ernie Clement, it's a nice story, and we'll see what ends up happening here. But no one's coming down to the ballpark to see Ernie. So no one's really spending too much time on it. But with Manoah, the idea was, hey, this dude spent every single day of the offseason posting on his Instagram that he was working out, that he was getting in better shape. And every single insider I talked to and every person that I tried to feel on Manoah was, yeah, maybe they could, but the market's not really there, and it doesn't feel as though they're being overly aggressive in terms of trying to move him. They want to bring him back. They want to try to recuperate the value. Then he's entering spring with a fairly healthy lead as the 5th starter in terms of the leash he's going to have. They want to build the confidence back up. He gets the injury, and now he's going to start. And, in Buffalo, that's not a big deal. You're right. The optics of this early are fine. What I find most curious is what happens if he's down there kind of dealing, looking good, looking like the old Alek Manoah, but Bowden Francis is pitching well, and these guys stay healthy, and he's maintaining an ERA that's around 4. What is the decision that the Blue Jays make if that's the call? Will they leave Manoah down there? Will they try to jump him up immediately and push Bowden Francis down? I don't think that's really been. I don't know if we have the answer to that.
No, we don't yet. It's probably the unlikeliest way this all goes, sure, with everything going right at the same time. But if it does, and every once in a while it's going to, if it does, you've got a very good problem. I don't think it points to a trade or anything like that. That's easy to have, kind of my old video game brain where you have 6 guys, you trade one and get a great second baseman or something. That's not how it works. But I think that would be a lovely problem for this team to have, and maybe by midseason there are ways you can work in an extra starter. These rotation guys, the veterans especially, you look at Bassett, Kikuchi, Gosman, they're coming off a ton of innings last year, and sustaining that is going to be tough. That's something Chris Bassett talked about early in camp, which I respected. He wasn't looking at this foolishly. He was saying, look, I live in reality. It might not repeat itself that all of those innings come from all of us again. It'll need some depth there. So if Manoah makes that an uncomfortable conversation, that's a great thing for the organization. And especially as you are approaching a deadline, if you have a surplus, sure, that's a good thing to have, especially if you're looking to improve an offense. And by that point as well, I mean, if we're talking May, June, Ricky Tiedemann could be kicking the door down, absolutely booting the door in where you have to get him on the roster. At a certain point, you just need your 13 best pitchers. That could take a lot of weird shapes. I know the bulk guy role is a little more popular now. It's not the demotion it used to be, but Tiedemann could be just as much involved in this. Same with Yariel Rodriguez. Yeah. This could get crowded in a very good way, but very crowded. Yeah,
I think where you want to be is that you can be very patient with Tiedemann, and that if he forces his way into major league innings, that you're ready to find a spot for him eventually. But yeah, in regards to the flipping one of those pitchers, if both of them are going well, you're definitely not doing that because of the injuries and the fact that you just outlined. Mitch White is the guy behind them. Until Ricky Tiedemann is ready to assume that role, you're not messing around with that whatsoever. Plus, I don't know how a deal like that gets done during this season, especially if the Blue Jays are competitive. It makes, I guess, a little bit more sense if they're out of it come deadline time, how they would evaluate their starting staff or what they would do with those guys. But I don't think anybody's thinking that way just yet. You just hope that Alek Manoah, if he is pitching well, and if this scenario does happen, which you're right is unlikely, that he's going to end up being okay with it, and that it doesn't become a story where people are going, man, Manoah's getting annoyed that he's still down there. He wants to pitch in the majors, and he feels like he's earned a spot. Okay, so you mentioned Yariel Rodriguez. He's pitching Sunday. I think you said it's conceivably enough time for him to make the team, but how does he fit into all this? And weirdly enough, like you just said, Mitch White is their kind of sneaky 7 starter. feels like he's also the guy that's behind Yariel Rodriguez in the bulk role. Does he have options? Like, what happens there? How does he go from being kind of that more important role to potentially not on the team? Because when I'm looking at this, it kind of feels like he's a pivot guy.
Yeah, he is right on that line right now. And if I was lining up the bullpen, White is kind of that easy eighth guy in the bullpen who gives you bulk innings, but maybe the first one out, depending on how everything else is going. And Rodriguez, I think, just needs a bit more time. You know, he'll be up to about 2 innings on Sunday. Maybe gets to 3 in his next one this spring. But Schneider said they'd like to get him up near 5. So that implies there's more stretching out to do. And from the beginning, I thought the AAA was an option, not as a demotion, but just as part of this plan. Then he missed that week or so with back spasms. I think that made it more likely at this point. And even if it just kicks it a couple of weeks into the season, just to get him comfortable, get him back into a groove. I mean, routines is the buzzword of spring. Every spring has a buzzword that I grow to hate, but what it means is that just getting a guy normal. You know, Yariel has not pitched on a regular schedule, over a year. So get him normal, pitching every 4 or 5 days, built up, doing his thing over and over, then bring him up. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, Yariel could be a starter. He could be pitching 2 innings. You can max him out over 1 inning like he did overseas. There's a lot of ways this can look, but you're seeing, again, just like the rotation we're talking about, JD, and this kind of bulk role, bullpen role, there's a lot of pitchers here. It's a good thing on the pitching side. That's why people are so confident that this pitching staff will be good again and that you need upside from the offense, because even if 1 or 2 guys falter and have a bad year, which is going to happen in the bullpen, you've got a few more options there. And I like Rodriguez a lot. That's a signing that at least had upside to it. I think that's my favorite deal of the offseason, because you can at least see it working out better than expected.
Yeah. Do you out of all those roles, though, that the Blue Jays probably hope for him, it is a upper bulk arm, though, right? Like someone who does come in and pitches 2 innings for them, but pitches them well?
Yeah, I see that this year, a bulk role this year, kind of hybrid-y, stretching him out to be a starter next year when you could lose a Kikuchi or have a a rotation role open. So stretching him out through this year, starter next year.
Okay. All right. So let's do a little bullpen talk then, because it looks deep. I know everybody's joking about Mesa right now and the MLB, the show rating and all that different stuff. But my biggest thing is, how does Romano look? Because last year it was a little shaky, and it was basically, they lost Hicks in free agency, and I don't think anybody talked about it. I don't know how much. That was like the least amount of oxygen that was spent on a kind of high-profile guy that they brought in here, and everyone said, well, they might bring him back. And then I don't really remember one serious conversation about the Blue Jays trying to bring him back. He departs. You look at the bullpen, it's all familiar characters, and, they'll have a full season, I guess, where they say they're going to have Chad Green. But ultimately, a lot of this rests on, do you have one of the best closers in Major League Baseball again? Or do you have the guy that, we saw flashes from last year that got a little bit shaky? What's the word on Romano?
Yeah, because not everybody can close. You need your closer to be your closer. And Romano, admittedly, over the years, has enjoyed putting 2 guys on, making it real interesting, and then getting the last guy. He's very good at adding some drama and then dominating in the biggest at-bat of the game. So he has, when you look at the broader numbers over the last few years, been one of the more consistent relievers in baseball, which doesn't maybe feel like it, if you're watching the games each night, because there are the close calls. But Romano has this ability to make the last pitch when it matters. And I know this from having a lot of stories that I'm getting nervous about on the final out. I'm going to have to burn down and write again, and then Romano saves it. I still think he is one of the truly top-end closers in this game. Any reliever can have an absolute terrible year at any time. We see how this works, but I think Romano's proven himself with that consistency, with the ability to kind of pull it back onto the road right before it goes into the ditch. If you do that a few times, maybe it's a coincidence. If you do it 100 times, I start to believe in it. And Romano's a guy who I think has earned the right to ramp up a little bit at his own pace. In camp, he's not going to be out here pacing around and dripping sweat and throwing 98 like he is in the season. But I think we'll see him a little bit more frequently these last 10 days or so as he gets ready for the season. And for him, health is a big thing as well. He's got to make sure he's not dealing with anything. Some minor issues last year he was working around, but I think when you see it over and over, the way that he kind of tap dances out of this danger that sometimes he creates himself, sure, but he always gets out of it. And I think the consistency has been there at a position where guys just aren't all that consistent.
Yeah, so last year was a little different, though, because in the second half of the season, he wasn't the same guy. And, like, the OPS against him in September, October ballooned to, like, 746 against, which is like, like August is 388, 649. So you're, I guess, reading between the lines on that, you're more a believer of a guy that does kind of dance between the raindrops at times. This maybe is just more of a, hey, now they started to go against him. Because it felt a little bit more like that in the moment where he was like, maybe working back from an injury or whatever. But, yeah, that's just the byproduct more so of a guy that, pitches that way, where he has to pitch himself out of trouble in the ninth inning.
Yeah, I believe in the results at this point. If I'd been asked this maybe 2-3 years ago, coming off his first good year, I would have leaned a bit more to maybe projecting some regression or a little bit of luck swinging to the left or the right. But at this point, he's done it. And I think a full, healthy season will be big for him. And I think Jordan's gotten a lot smarter, like most relievers do as they age, with managing his workload and the strain on his body, understanding that maybe you can take that off day in between appearances. This is something we talk more about with starters, but I think Jordan and some of the relievers are starting to understand this better, of managing yourself, knowing when you're on a hot streak and you don't need to keep driving yourself between these outings, saving some bullets for late in the year, because Romano has also had a pretty big workload for a reliever and has not had much downtime throughout that. So managing that's going to be important, because it's not just about getting that save in Baltimore on a Tuesday in April. It's about late October when relievers really are running out of gas.
Yeah, and again, the Blue Jays bullpen is deep, right? Like, you look at the names, and it's the same cast of characters essentially that you saw last year, right? Like, they're deep. But has there been, you always want it is a bullpen, right? You mentioned it, fluctuate. You can end up with a guy who was amazing the year before and then kind of garbage the year after, or a guy who was kind of written off and then he ends up being a star. But yeah, you've been there on the island for over a month. You know, you're scratching the days into the wall when you wake up every morning or when you go to bed each night. It's when you see the sunrise. That's how it's got to be. When you see the sunrise, you're scratching one into the wall. But has there been one of these guys in the bullpen, and maybe someone who's not going to make the team, that when you're talking to people around the Blue Jays, they're saying, we're fairly optimistic about this. We're really like what we're seeing from this person?
You're starting to see some prospect guys come up that are actual relievers, not just failed starters who are turning into hybrids, but guys who come up as relievers, which I like. Connor Cook is one. Connor Cook has gotten a lot of attention here in camp. He's a very hard-throwing right-hander. There's some attention around him. You're looking at the fringe guys who are off this roster, which I think could include a Nate Pearson down in AAA. You're
not doing that again.
Some of these upside arms. I know we have that conversation annually, but you're going to have guys like Pearson pop off this roster who are better than a lot of organizations can do bringing a guy up, at least in May or June. Looking around the roster, I think Jimmy Garcia is going to bounce back this year, frankly. I know that's not an exciting or a sexy name, but Jimmy is a guy that always comes into camp real hot, real early. Like, he's the guy throwing 97 in the middle of February. And he has looked great this year. I think a lot of his numbers are going to bounce back naturally. And that's important as that seventh, kind of eighth inning guy. And then you're going to get a full season of Chad Green, which is probably the one that gets brought up to me most unprompted, is a full season of Chad Green, which is what this team had in mind back when they signed him. I think that's a real benefit to this group. And a guy that if you do lose Romano, knock on wood for them, but if you do, he's a guy that can step into that ninth inning and has pitched in a lot of those big moments. Yeah, no, I'm a big Chad Green guy. What I will say is, and this is so rude and so unfair, but the very first spring game where Pearson came in, and what was it, back-to-back bombs? It all happened real quick, real ugly. It was like boom, boom, and I just said, yeah, I'm not doing this. I refuse to play the game of, the upside is there, and he's accepted being a relief pitcher now. I ain't doing any of it. If it happens, great. But he is the ultimate, I'm not spending 1 minute on what it could be if all the dominoes fall. It's like I've been tricked too many times. I've already fallen for that too many times. And we went way too far after the Tampa outing in the playoffs when he first came, and we were like, oh my God.
he's going to be the best pitcher in Major League Baseball. But the guy that you mentioned there that I am a little interested in is Pop, because he did have a moment where you went, ooh, like this guy looks like he could be very, really serious. And then that completely kind of dissipated. And I was curious about his spring and whether or not he was going to make the roster, but it looks like he's on the outside looking in still as well.
Yeah, it looks like he is.
Yeah.
He'd be in that number 9, number 10 conversation, which, again, is not bad. That's a good place to be if you need another reliever on April 20th, May 30th, whenever it is. That's a good place to be. Pop last year really got it working with that slider off of his sinker, and it looked great for a while. It was really hot. And, frankly, that's what you need once or twice a year. You need a guy unexpectedly to get hot for 2 months. You need to know when to roll him out at the right time and when to cash out at the right time. That's how you build a good bullpen outside of your core 5, 6, 7 guys. And Pop will be there. He's got another shot to have another one of those runs. It'll start on the outside. It'll start in Buffalo, I think, with Pearson, Cook, some of these other guys in around him. But quantity is a good approach. They don't all need to be a top prospect. If you have 4 or 5 relievers on the fringes, you just need one of them to pop. And I like a quantity approach to the bullpen. It's so unpredictable. So if one of them can really catch fire, you win.
So last thing, you mentioned in your when you projected the roster, you do have Ernie Clement there in that final spot. How do the Blue Jays make that work then? Like how does this operate with Espinal? I feel like, do you think that, like, how does the bench look? Let's put it that way. If he's a part of it, how does the bench work and how does the infield end up working coming into the season?
I do like Clement at this point. I think he's at a fantastic camp. He's out of options, which will help. So you'll have one of the backup catchers, whichever one is not playing that day on the bench. You'll have Vogelbach on the bench. You'll have Clement on the bench. Then out of that crowded group, it's a Biggio, it's a Schneider. Somebody else will be on the bench that day. It's a bench that I like a little bit more than last year. You can play the matchups with a guy who crushes righties in Vogelbach. Clement is kind of like Alejandro Kirk in a weird way, a guy who I would really like as a pinch hitter. If you just need a ball in play, he makes ridiculous contact. Every time he swings, he hits the ball. All contact, all the time. So I like that matchup, and I like Clement on this roster. A bit awkward to have Espinal on the outside. He has the relationships. He has the history with the team, but it eventually does need to change, I think, at this point. And having Espinal still with the organization would be still a very good thing, obviously, and he's beloved in that clubhouse. But right now, Clement is making this more of a decision than I thought it would be, frankly, coming into camp. And he's a guy who does not get enough credit for how athletic he is. He's a great natural athlete, and I think can play multiple positions and come in after a week on the bench and make a ton of contact. He's a big leaguer. He is a big leaguer this season. I think it happens in Toronto, but if it happens somewhere else, he's in the big leagues. Yeah,
but the implication here, though, is that it's becoming more likely Espinal ends up not being a part of this organization at all, and the Jays recoup absolutely nothing for him. They weren't going to get anything much at all in the first place. I think that they probably explored that during the offseason, but is that the way you see it going?
Yeah, I don't project Espinal on this roster right now. It's certainly not 100% lean. It's more of a leaning to one side on Clement, we can put it. And it's still totally conceivable to see Espinal on this roster. But where it is right now, I do lean to Clement. And I know there's been a lot of folks bring up over the spring, how about you take 2 of them, trade them somewhere else and get something. You're not going to get something that improves your roster. You're going to get a prospect that maybe we see a flash of in 4 years. You're not going to package 2 depth infielders together to get a star third baseman. It's not MLB The Show 2012 or something. So it's if the trade market did work like that, this would be great. But kind of like the pitching side, like the Blue Jays middle infield depth picture, it's just so crowded. Right now, I do like Clement, but kind of like we talked about those relievers, you just hope that one really pops. You hope that one gets off to a great start and does something that raises the ceiling of this roster. And that's what it comes back to for me, JD, is just what's your thing? How are you going to raise the ceiling? Clement, elite contact. Espinal, maybe he can hit some lefties while he plays defense, but if you're just depth for the sake of depth, that doesn't do much. You got to have a thing.
Yeah. By the way, no one's going to hold you to your which middle infield depth guy they end up with. So
Hey,
it's a Celine. I'm like,
all the time anyway,
we're talking about our hateful Reddit threads. I don't think you're going to get a hateful Reddit. You know, Keegan Matheson thought it was going to be Ernie Clement, and then it ends up being an all-season thing. Okay, we'll let you go, but, you are on the island. You are there stuck in baseball purgatory, just day after day after day of these conversations. Is there anything you need to get off your chest? Like, you're speaking to another human being that's back in the real world. Is there anything you need right now?
You know what? I see the light. I am 5 days away from getting back to Canada for a quick wedding. I think I've done hotel laundry for the last time.
You're a prisoner. You get to leave the prison for a wedding or a funeral, and then you got to go right back.
Yeah, in Vancouver too. It's very close to Florida, so it's all lining up for me, baby. But I think I've done hotel laundry for the last time, so I'm cruising out. I've kicked it into neutral. And I'm just hoping a story comes and smacks me in the face today.
God, that's so good. You're Johnny Sacks. You're leaving for your daughter's wedding. And then they're going to drag you off in handcuffs right at the end of it as they're all yelling at the officers bringing you back down to Spring. Hey, Keegan, it's great to chat with you, buddy. Thanks so much for making time.
You got it, man. Take care.
Cheers, pal.